Hi everybody, I'm Tony Traguardo from the Port Washington Public Library. While the library was closed for a few months, many people have been availing themselves of our streaming services, and that's wonderful. There are a couple of fantastic streaming services available for you to get all kinds of different things, whether that is books, audio books, music, movies, etc. And they will obviously continue to be available now that, at this point, as of this recording on August 3rd, the library is open for limited time periods for people to come in and browse, which is wonderful. But it is truly amazing what you can find on Hoopla in particular. I've been doing a weekly show called Tony T's Toon Talk, which is available on the YouTube channel. And at the end of that show, I remind folks that most of the music that I talk about during that show is available on Hoopla. And I'm going to go over now with some of the things that I've been finding and just fill you in on a couple of tips. I did an episode of Tony T's Toon Talk and mentioned this, and I also did something during one of my roundtable discussions, and I brought up Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel's early incarnation as Tom and Jerry. They recorded a whole bunch of songs between the time when they recorded their first hit, Hey Schoolgirl, in 1956, and when they got back together in 1963 to start working together as a folk duo. In between, they did a whole bunch of things under the names Jerry Landis and Tico and the Triumphs and Artie Garr and all that stuff. I was very surprised that when I put Tom and Jerry into, now when I'll warn you now, when you do it in Hoopla in a general search, you're going to get, you guessed it, the cartoons. But do Tom and Jerry in the music search, and you're going to come up with a collection that came out in 2014 called Two Teenagers on a label called Cherished Records. Most of the album releases that carry this material are of questionable legitimacy, but many of the songs are out of copyright, things like that. If they're European releases, that's fine. And this one made its way onto Hoopla. It's there, 46 minutes worth of 20 songs of Tom and Jerry. So that was a nice surprise. I found that there are so many labels that are doing these sort of the complete album collection of, or they'll do sort of 5 albums of, and they call it the album collection. But one of the ones that really blew my mind, and this is an artist that up until I gave this a listen through Spotify, I wasn't familiar with a lot of his work, was the amazing Wilson Pickett. I've always known as a music fan, as something of a, quote, musicologist, a pop music historian, that Wilson Pickett is Wilson Pickett. I mean, you have stuff like In the Midnight Hour, and you've got some of the most dynamic vocals and exciting sounds that you can hear on record. But on Hoopla is the Complete Atlantic Albums Collection. 10 of Wilson Pickett's LPs compiled into a full set. The running time is 5 hours and 33 minutes. You can take it out and just spend a whole lot of time binge enjoying the wicked Pickett and having fun with stuff like that. One guy that you really don't think is going to be featured so magnanimously in free services, or services available through the libraries. I mean, they're not free to the libraries, but they're free to you, the end users, would be Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa's family holds a tight rein on Frank's work, rightfully so. Frank was extremely prolific, and the family has been good to companies like Hoopla and giving them access to so many of the Frank Zappa releases. The one in particular that got me was in 2017. They released a collection of all of the live shows that Frank did over the week of Halloween in 1977, called, oddly enough, Halloween 77. And again, this collection runs 15 hours and 46 minutes. And it's one of the releases from something called the Zappa Family Trust. The cool thing about Hoopla is when you do a search and you get your responses, you get your hits. If you bring up, for instance, Halloween '77, because you've done a search for Frank Zappa, and you see that it was created by the Frank Zappa Family Trust, or it's one of the Zappa Family Trust releases, you can click on those words within Hoopla, and now it limits the search to just the Zappa Family Trust releases, which is very cool. And that's why I say, if you search for Tom and Jerry in a general search, you get the cartoons. You do it in music, you get Paul and Artie. So definitely, if you're a fan of Frank Zappa's music, look into the Zappa Family Trust releases. These are just complete live shows, beautifully recorded. You don't get documentation, which is one bit of a limit with Hoopla. But the truth is, you can usually go on the web and at least find a very decent explanation. You obviously won't get the original liner notes, but you'll find a really strong, write-up about what it is that you've taken on, what you're going to be listening to. The Everly Brothers. I'm a big fan of the Everly Brothers, and I was really happy to see that two of their, well, more than two, but their 80s albums that were on Mercury Records, the two for me that I always remembered having when I was growing up was one called Born Yesterday, which features a cover of what at that time was a still unreleased Bob Dylan song called Abandoned Love, which George Harrison also recorded a version of, which still stays unreleased. But Born Yesterday, and another one called EB84, Everly Brothers 84, recorded in 1984. And those and the rest of their 80s, their Mercury Records output from the 80s, is available on something called the Complete Mercury Studio Recordings, 1984 to 1988. And again, that's to be found on Hoopla. If you do Complete Mercury Studio Recordings, you'll get that. If you do a search for the Everly Brothers in the music section, you'll get that as well. Of course, if you want to read about the Everly Brothers, you can do a book search and see what you can find. The other thing that I had fun with is my wife and I are big fans of a character named Harry Dresden. Jim Butcher has written a series of books. I think he may have just released the 16th book, Peace Talks, and as of, again, August 2020. But the character Harry Dresden is a wizard who the Chicago Police Department call upon when something supernatural happens. He's the only wizard in the Chicago phone book. But the character itself, in my opinion, is just a brilliantly written character. And I find that on Hoopla I could find the graphic novels, which is cool. In particular, there's an omnibus called Jim Butcher's Dresden Files Omnibus Volume 1. If you like supernatural stuff, if you really are into crossover things, this isn't just like, and it's not for young kids, definitely not. This is not your Harry Potter, this is Harry Dresden. You're going to get your vampires and your werewolves and things like that, but crossbreeded with wizardry and magic and fairies and all kinds of stuff like that. But again, the cool thing about the omnibus is it includes two of the Dresden novels as graphic interpretations, as graphic novels. It also, this first omnibus includes a story called Welcome to the Jungle, which was not in any of the Dresden books. So it's something new for someone who's read all the books. Also, kind of the interesting thing about reading Harry Dresden in a graphic novel, as opposed to how we're used to reading it in a novel, or seeing the short-lived TV series, for instance, is that having listened to a bunch of the books on the audio books, I have grown accustomed to the way the actor Jim Marsters does Harry's voice. So, to me, when I see dialogue or words connected to Harry, I tend to hear Jim Marsters' voice. It's cool to see a graphic novel where I can now see Dresden's actions being interpreted by an artist, but yet I'm reading. So I could still, in a way, hear what I feel is Harry Dresden's voice in my own head, rather than sort of have a new voice of an actor put upon me, rather than James Marsters, who's been doing Harry for a really long time in the books. Speaking of the omnibuses and characters that people may be very familiar with, there is a piece available in Hoopla called the Sherlock Holmes Omnibus, Volume 1. Came out in 2016. It's written by various artists and illustrated by various illustrators. It is so exciting to see that character being interpreted by different authors, and to sort of have this sort of beloved character in Adventures. They go over his first meeting with Dr. Watson. And this is not like which I love. The young Sherlock Holmes film, absolutely wonderful. But it's not like that. It's a rewrite of the story, how he met Dr. Watson. These are really the stories in that first one is the trial of Sherlock Holmes, Year One, and Liverpool Demon. These are the three storylines that you'll get in this first omnibus. But definitely, if you're a fan of Holmes and the Holmes character, worth looking into. Finally, talking about being fans of a franchise, there is a Planet of the Apes omnibus that came out in 2018. Huge, 500 plus pages, written by a gentleman named Daryl Gregory. Absolutely unbelievable illustrations. If you're a fan of the Planet of the Apes idea, and you want to go back to, it starts over 1,000 years before the arrival of Colonel Taylor, if you remember the first film. So it's 1,000 years before the first movie from 1967 or 67, I believe, or 68, came out. And it incorporates some of the same ideas in terms of the characters. Characters have different names and things like that. But if you're someone who appreciates anything with these two civilizations who are trying to coexist, and it deals, of course, with the idea of war and conflict and whatnot, but very, very well written. And the omnibus takes in issues 1 through 16 of the comic series. So in a nutshell, these are just some of the fun things that I've found on Hoopla. And I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Hoopla Digital Diaries. And I'm Tony Traguardo. So come back and keep an eye on what we're doing on the YouTube library page. And there will be more episodes to come. So all I can say from there is go out and enjoy Hoopla. Thanks for watching.